Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. It's a real pleasure to open this event. Adapt or collapse. The radical overhaul our living world needs in the age of climate crisis. My name is Jing Chen, a PhD researcher in landscape architecture at the University of Sheffield. I've had the great pleasure of leading a team of 6 PhD students from different countries and disciplines to put this event together. With generous support from the Grantham Center and the Festival of Debate, we choose today's theme because, more than ever, we face a hard reality: adapt or collapse. For too long, we've all hoped that small steps and gradual mitigation would be enough. But climate change is no longer slow or distant. What we are seeing now is destabilized system where past experience no longer predicts future survival. Scientists warn we've likely caused several planetary tipping points. Temperatures are rising 50 times faster than the historical norms. By 2100, warming may exceed 4 degrees Celsius, more than the total fluctuation of the last 12,000 years. Our civilization was built in that stable window we've now left behind. And this isn't just a crisis, it's a rupture. And with it comes urgency, species, infrastructure. The whole system cannot adapt fast enough. Extinction rates are now 1,000 times higher than natural background levels. By 2050, 3 billion people may live in zones too hard for human survival. Every decade of delay triples the cost of adaptation. So the question is, do we tinker or do we transform? That's why today's forum isn't about coping. It's about reimagining, not mitigation, but bold adaptation, not repair, but system redesign, not just surviving, but rethinking how we live with a changed planet. And to do that, today's session brings together a leading voice from ecology, agriculture, and urban planning, offering bold interdisciplinary ideas and moves us beyond convention, beyond native-only landscapes, beyond soil-based farming, and beyond adult-centric cities. So whether you are a student, a practitioner, a policymaker, or simply someone concerned about our shared future, we hope today offers knowledge and inspiration. Now, I will hand over to our host, who will guide us through the rest of the session. Nitkamon, over to you.
Thank you for welcoming me and hello everyone. So the session today we're gonna split into 4 sections. The first 3 is from our speaker, which is about the non-native plant in our ecosystem, and the second one is gonna be the soilless farming or hydroponic, and the last one is gonna be the city for children from Dr. Michael Martin, and the last section is going to be the general discussion, which is also 15 minutes. For the speaker, in each session, we're going to have 15 minutes of the talk and then 5 minutes of the Q&A. For the Q&A section, we would like to introduce you to the function of the Q&A features in the Google Meet. If you go down there, you can see the 9 dot in the right corner, and then you can find the Q&A function. So in this section, you can just drop the question during the talk, and then we can select some and then discuss it in our 5 minutes of Q&A section. Then let's move to our first speakers. Professor Ross Cameron from the School of Architecture and Landscape at the University of Sheffield. And basically, he is more interested in the green infrastructure and climate change mitigation. And today, he invites us to rethink about the question of the invasive species, is it good or bad? So please join me in welcoming Professor Ross Cameron.
Okay, well, good afternoon, folks. I'm Ross Cameron, and I'm in the School of Architecture and Landscape, and I work on urban plants, landscape plants, but also their relationship to biodiversity, to nature. And so the theme of my talk this afternoon is really about those plants that don't occur naturally in Britain, non-native plants, and what role they might have in the future. So non-native plants, sometimes called exotics, are plants that have come in from other parts of the planet but are grown in the UK. So they're often used for horticultural or sometimes crop reasons, but they haven't evolved and they haven't colonized the UK naturally. They've been brought in by humans. And non-native plants tend to be very welcome in gardens and parks, but generally unwelcome elsewhere. These are not part of our natural ecology. They're not the sort of things you would necessarily find in the countryside, but they are used very much within the mainframe of horticulture and agriculture. However, government policy and most ecologists have a philosophy that really, in terms of ecological functioning of the UK landscape, we want to try and keep non-native plants out. So we generally exclude them other than in our own parks and gardens. And you certainly wouldn't want to use them in environmental planting schemes, and policies tend to try and avoid their use. There's also quite a lot of legislation about bringing them into the country. If you're bringing non-native plants in, then you need an import license, and you certainly would be discouraged from bringing in seeds or plants from your holidays. And this is because some are seen as dangerous invasive aliens. They can get into a niche, ecological niche, and they can exploit it if they're in a country that isn't their native country. So some can be invasive. About 5 to 10% are potentially invasive. So we have to be aware of that these non-native plants could be damaging to our ecosystem. But in reality, that tends to paint a picture that's really rather black and white, and I'm not sure that's correct. So for this, making the assumption that all our native plants are good and beneficial and provide lots of services, many of them, of course, do because they underpin our ecology. But we shouldn't necessarily just exclude anything that's not native for its values. So we know these plants are appreciated aesthetically, but they may also be providing other services, cleaning the air, regulating water courses, providing natural cycling, etc. So the question rises, do these plants, park plants, garden plants, do they actually have an ecological value? And if you take a look at this image here, this is a very sort of aesthetically driven landscape. It's very much about design and aesthetics, but it is actually providing a service to some of the birds in the area, providing a home for some invertebrates, and may even have small mammals present. So to say that these are completely bad seems to be a slight skewing of the argument. And this has been reinforced by research over the last 30 or 40 years. Possibly the most iconic was a lady called Jennifer Owen, who was an entomologist by profession. And she looked at her own garden, not the wild, her own domestic garden, and found that supported over 2,000 species of insects. And when she recorded them, there was 20 species new to the UK, hadn't been recorded here before, and there were 6 that were actually new to science. And about 40% of the UK hoverflies, for example, occur in our gardens. So these are actually quite rich biological environments and probably do need more profile for the role they're playing to support British wildlife. It depends on the garden. Some are richer than others, but we also know that some well-designed gardens can have as much insect life as a nature reserve. So are gardens really full of these non-native plants? Are they really bad for wildlife, or is that a little bit painting the picture too simplistically? Anyway, the battle has raged over the last 20 years or so about how much value non-native plants provide to UK's faunal wildlife. I guess my overview of the situation at the minute is that, of course, if we can just have native plants, they're the best for wildlife. Let's plant native, that's what's best. But that doesn't mean that the non-natives don't have a role, especially in the urban environment. Some of them are really quite good for wildlife. So we need to have a more nuanced approach to them. Sadly, some of these arguments are becoming quickly very academic in the wider sense of that word there, because the UK climate itself will no longer be suitable for British native plants. The climate's warming and things are moving north, and our native plants will struggle in the future. So the elephant in the room in this argument is climate change. We're not talking about a stable UK climate. The climate is getting warmer and more unpredictable. So what does that actually mean in reality? It's all very well talking about theories about climate change. What do we have to deal with in the gritty reality of everyday planning over the next few years? So what does it mean for the UK specifically? Well, we know politically our parties are all dithering around the place. They're not quite sure what climate change means and how bad it is, and they're not sure whether they can afford net zero and other things. So there's a mishmash as usual with politics about not really seeing the big picture. However, within the scientific community, we are really trying to work out how to deal with it at a practical level. What does it mean in tangible words and phrases? Well, to some extent, we're actually dependent on the political position because we don't know how quickly the climate will warm and we don't know to what extent it will warm. So we are modeling, but modeling has its limitations too. But at the moment, we're thinking it's going to be somewhere between 1.6 and 4 degrees warming, depending on how much CO2 is emitted over the next few decades. So this means that some change is inevitable. And we already need to just look out the door and see that we're getting rather strange weather phenomenon. It's already happening in some ways. But let's just take the worst end of my scenario, this 4 degrees warming. What does that make the planet look like by the end of the century? And it's a fairly shocking picture, because if we get 4 degrees warming, basically our equatorial regions become uninhabitable. We're losing the Amazonian forest. We're losing much of the natural ecosystems around Mexico, southern USA. Much of North Africa becomes even more hot. And you have to see people and species move to the poles. And these rather alarming little white dots at the top aren't snowflakes. These are our new cities at 2100. We will have to build cities around the Arctic Circle to accommodate the world's population. If we take Sheffield, it becomes Casablanca. We're at the edge of a desert system. It's not even as simple as that. It's the edge of a desert system. We'll still experience storms coming in from the west. So the Atlantic system will still be functional to some extent. And we're going to see more storms, but also particularly high winds being predicted. And that makes a rather stable desert environment itself quite challenging. So climate change will just about change every aspect of human life. But what does it do for non-human life? How does it cope? The reality is that many of our ecosystems will either disappear or will have to be modified very, very radically. So species that are present in the equatorial regions will need to find a home further north or south of that. So we have to start thinking the unthinkable. How do we actually move these ecosystems around the planet? They've evolved in these geographical locations, but they're not going to survive in those locations. So do we have a moral obligation to start moving the ecology around? We've always been worried about invasive species, things coming into our country which aren't native. But what is the worst scenario? No plants and animals because they can't survive here, or beginning to manage new introductions because they can survive here. Because we know that we have a moral obligation to try and preserve the global biodiversity, but that means moving species around. And the UK ones at present might have to go off and live in northern Scandinavia, and the ones that are in Spain and Africa might need to come and live here. Some species will move naturally. They're already doing it. Birds, for example, are changing their distributions, but not all animals can move, and plants are very slow at moving. But we are getting some changes, and we're getting unique ecosystems happening anyway. The question becomes, should we as a species start to control that and make it a more balanced process rather than a more random choice one? So should we move a whole ecosystem as a single unit in a planned way and at the same time? Britain makes a really interesting model for this because we've actually got a long history of bringing in non-native animals and plants. Things like the hare, the fallow deer, Bambi as it were, are actually not native British animals, but they've been here for a few hundred years and they've become part of the ecology. So we have an opportunity to use areas, particularly our urban areas, as early experimental environments to see what new species can come in, how do they behave, and can we develop new unique ecosystems that allow species from further south to survive. So active colonization is on the agenda. But species have to cross borders, and Britain is particularly challenging because we have this thing called the English Channel. If you're a violet ground beetle, you're not going to get here on your own accord. So how do we move these species across in a controlled way? And again, I think the urban environment is a very good catalyst and model for this. We already have a high proportion of non-native species in our cities. Can we adjust that and modify that to create whole ecosystems? By 2040, the UK will probably be a frost-free place, and that opens up the range of plants we can grow much more extensively. We can bring in many, many plants, and we can start to develop whole ecosystems should we wish to do so. So the question becomes, does Sheffield become a Mediterranean, North African dominated flora? If that works, then we are thinking about if we can actively plant Mediterranean plants, particularly starting off in an urban environment, we can encourage those species that are already moving north to have a home, to have a habitat. So flying invertebrates, birds could start to colonize naturally. As I've already outlined, some species won't get here naturally though. So we then have to investigate the feasibility of introducing other animals more artificially. And if it works at a small scale in an urban environment, then we move up to the rural environment. We start bringing in the bigger iconic animals, possibly. And that's going to be a huge logistic effort, but nevertheless, you can increase the number of species and actually create a much more robust ecosystem. So I'm just going to finish there then, but basically to conclude, the world is changing and it's changing fast. There's very little we can do about that. There will be some change. The natural ecology and plant animal migrations cannot keep up. They're not going to get here on their own accord in many cases. If we lose our iconic ecosystems, the tropical rainforests of South America, the savannas of Africa, these will go if we don't actually take action. But we need to start the debate now about what we can do and what we need to do. And by God, it's going to be controversial. We are literally playing the role of God. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. Hopefully we'll get some thoughts and questions on that, along with some of the other speakers later this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ross. It's quite like provocative and insightful things for me. The map that you showed me, like the 4-degree increasing, is quite super impact, and I totally agree because I'm from Thailand, and for now we even like got heavy rain and big flooding in Bangkok maybe like yesterday. So it's time for the Q&A session. Does anyone, our audience, do you have any question? You can just put it in the Q&A features of the Google meeting, and then I can select some for asking. Okay, we got one. From let's see, is I wonder to what extent the work currently taking place on rewilding area of the UK focus on the future proofing this area against the climate change.
Good question, Lizzie. So yeah, rewilding is trying to use nature to do its own thing. It's a little bit artificial sometimes because they bring in big animals, they bring in herbivores and to some extent carnivores that are proxies for the species we lost in the past. So things like conic ponies, Dartmoor ponies are brought in to play the role of things like elk that we've lost in the past. So there is a little bit of flexibility around the philosophies of rewilding. I think the current thinking is that just nature will kind of bring in some of the new species. We'll have storks, we'll have other species moving in, but as I've outlined a little bit in my presentation, that only accommodates the ones that can get here under their own steam. So it's part of the philosophy, but they won't actively yet, or it's not part of their philosophy to actively move animals in from a warmer climate. They're just talking about bringing back what was once here before.
Okay, thank you for the answers. And we also got another question. What are your thoughts about the AMOC destabilization, which may result in both warmer summers and cooler winter regard species viabilities?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. So obviously I didn't have time to talk about the AMOC, but that's where the scenarios go almost in the opposite direction. We get ice water cooling the North Atlantic, and we get a climatic shift that goes the other way. It gets colder. I think some of the principles are the same, although the species I've implied are different. The principles are the same. We start trying to accommodate walruses and polar bears in Shetland. We just have to try and help nature out wherever we can, but it's going the opposite way. It's helping those species that are cold adapted. It will change the way people change, because we will partially have to move south if we want to grow crops.
Oh, okay. We got plenty of the question. The next one is, if rewilding happen, do you feel there should be a way to protect the wildlife that come back, or making sure it stay?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I kind of implied a little bit of criticism of government policy at the minute, but our government policies are very conservative. They're not dynamic enough. And if species move into this country, I think we should be accommodating them and welcoming them, not seeing them as necessarily alien invasive pests. Many invertebrates, many insects will have to move north, and I think you'll just see changes in the ecosystems anyway. But the philosophy that we can keep the barriers up and still live in a century, 200 or 300 years ago, a golden age of biodiversity, it just isn't feasible. We're going to have to change one way or the other.
Okay, and then I think we still have one more question. What do you think we as practitioners could do with the current trend for the native plant already bought by the BNG, when we already know these plants are already struggling?
Yeah, well, it's about dialogue, Anna, isn't it? Biodiversity net gain is all about preserving native species, but we have to have dialogue with the policymakers to say the native species aren't always going to cut it. And we know in southern England, for example, that species such as sorbus and ulmus struggle in urban environments. So I would hope that the obvious was becoming more obvious to people, but it's about debate and dialogue. I mean, to be fair, DEFRA and Natural England do understand this issue. They're just not kind of presenting it to the politicians yet.
Okay, so I think we kind of a little bit run out of time. So could you please answer the question in the chat, maybe? Because we still have like 2 more questions.
Sure,
I really appreciate that. Sorry for that. And then let's move to the second session. Okay, so for the next presentation, we're gonna move to the soilless farming, which is like how it can reshaping the future food securities. And please welcome Dr. Moed Masamani. Sorry for that. I'm not really sure how to read that.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Moed. Today, I am going to talk to you about the urban farming, its importance, why we need it, and how we can apply it to make it effective and sustainable. Next slide, please. I'm not sure if you know that due to the massive increase in world population, we need to grow food more than what we have collectively grown throughout the human history. Currently, we were able to produce food to feed 8 billion people, but still we have more than 800 million people, 1 out of 10, sleep hungry every day. Majority they are in Africa. 3 billion people worldwide, they don't have access to healthy diet, and more than 9 million people die every year due to disease or to hunger-related disease. And majority, again, they are under the age of 5. Next slide, please. Now, if we combine this massive increase of world population with the risk of crop failure due to climate change, which is characterized by rising temperature or erratic rainfall, or extreme weather event like flood, drought, or even heat waves, which pose a critical threat to agriculture system, this brings the focus and the need to improve our capability to maintain a stable and with well-fed population. Next slide, please. Now, different scenario has been published around how this change in climate will impact our food system. And here example of some of the main crop, how it will be affected badly and how much reduction will happen to these crops and what would be the increase in price of this crop. This will tells you about how serious this problem is. Next, please. Now, maybe in the near future, the rural area won't be able to produce enough food to feed both rural and urban population. In 2007 was the first time when the urban population exceed the rural one. And currently we are going through, another cycle of urbanization where in 2020, the percentage of urban population reached 54%, expected to reach 60% in 2030 and 72% in 2050. Next, please. Always, urbanization is associated with poverty and food insecurity. It has been estimated that more than 1 billion people live in cities in slums area like this, 800 million in Asia, 220 million in Africa, and more than 130 million in Latin America. Next, please. Again, with urbanization, it's not only food insecurity and poverty, but also so many unwanted consequences like losing fertile land, pollution of water, soil, and many other problems. However, the urban area is about 2 to 3% only from the total land area, but is consumed 75% of the total energy and generate more than 80% of the total CO2 emission. Next, please. I believe many of you have seen similar image during the COVID-19 in big stores here in Sheffield or somewhere else in different city in the UK. And this due to supply chain disruption or even loss of the crop due to labor shortage. This happened particularly in the urban area, in the cities, which tells you how vulnerable is the urban area because it depends on food transport to place of consumption. Next, please. The food that we are consuming has been transported long distance to arrive to our tables. So it's estimated that food transport between 1,500 miles to 2,500 miles to reach to the consumers. During this process, a lot of CO2 emitted, estimated around 13% of the total CO2 emission. Here in the UK, the food transport inside the UK account for about 25% of the total heavy goods vehicle emission. Next, please. And this brings the attention on why we need the urban farming. So if the majority of the people living in the urban area, so it makes sense for those people to produce their own food. It helps in achieving food security. It reduces the negative impact to the environment since the food no need to transport it long distance, so it's near the consumer. Also, it helps in mitigating what we call heat island effect, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. Next, please. Also, it helps people, particularly in the middle income country, for employment or achieving some income. It has been estimated that, again, food produced in the urban area account for about 15 to 20% of the total agriculture produced. And it helped in generating some income for some people. More than 800 million worldwide now practicing urban farming. Again, it's expected or around 100 million people earn some cash directly from the agriculture practicing in the urban area. Next, please. it's established fact that the urban area is more hotter than the surrounding rural one. And this is due to human activity or even to change in the landscape in the urban area. And this increase either in heat or also in CO2, amount of CO2, it could have positive impact in the agriculture as it help in extending the growing season or even increase the productivity or even give the chance for other crop which can be grown not suited for this particular area before. Next, please. So it's not new. It has been practiced throughout the human history. UK have very long history of growing, a different type of vegetables and fruit in the private and allotment garden. In France, in 1890, in Paris, 1/6 of the city were used to produce different type of crops. Also during the First, Second War, and even during the economic depression also, the UK, American, and Australian and Europe government have encouraged people to grow and use what they call victory garden or war garden to produce different vegetables to feed the troops. Now the Cuban government have initiated program just to encourage people to use all the available spaces to produce different type of vegetables and fruit for human consumption. Next, please. However, you cannot apply the traditional type of farming, or there is a lot of limitation in using the traditional farming practice in the urban area due to the limitation imposed by limited space and pollution to water and the soil, and also due to limited water resources in the urban area. Due to this, you need to incorporate also the new technology or innovative practice to achieve what we call to make it efficient and sustainable. For example, using the soil culture, different type, hydroponics, aeroponics, or aquaponic, or vertical type of farming, it make high productivities through increasing the productivity per unit area. Even sometimes you don't need the land. If it is not available, you can do it indoor. It maximizes using of available resources from water, as it saves between 60 to 90% of the water consumption compared to traditional type of farming. It reduces the environmental impact since you produce the vegetables and fruit near the consumer, so no need to food transport. So food miles is zero here, more or less. So less CO2 emitted to the environment. Again, it makes best use of available resources in terms of sustainability, as you will be able to recycle whatever resources available in the surrounding environment, in the urban area, for practicing what you like from what we call urban farming. Next, please. So, again, adding or using the smart farming or the new technology, and once you practice the urban farming, it could have make it more efficient, more sustainable, increase the productivity, reduce the environmental impact. And this what have been done in Montreal vertical farm, which produce around 1 ton monthly, which has been used for different community causes or programs. Also in Versailles Exhibition Center in France, one of the biggest vertical farm, which used for producing around 2,000 pounds of different vegetables and fruit every day. Next, please. Now, I'll give you a brief about some of my work, which I have been done for the last 7 years in one of the desert in Jordan, a highly dense area with more than 80,000 people living in very small space, where the weather, there is harsh environment, very poor soil, very limited water, and but there is a lot of people with excellent farming skills. So we thought we can help them to produce their own food, greening their space, and achieving some sort of food security, help them to save some cash by introducing what we call soilless culture, but different from what people knows about hydroponics here, as we build different type of hybrid system that could fit with the available resources and materials as we try to recycle each and everything available in the camp to build the system or to use it as growing media or for the cause of producing different type of vegetables that they would like to consume. During those 7 years, we successfully dealt with all type of challenges from the harsh weather, poor water quality, very poor electricity, and different other limitation imposed to the refugees. And we trained more than 4,000 people in using soilless culture to produce what they would like to consume in their caravan. And we built more than around 400 what we call caravan system, helping people to produce and consume what they like in the camp. So we make it scalable, adaptable. We make it low cost, low tech, very cheap, affordable, at the same time easy to teach. And we think this type of setting could be replicated in any urban setting. I would like you to go through a different picture to show some of our work in the camp. Please go quickly through those pictures. Yeah, this can tell you and show you what people do in their caravan in the Jordanian desert in Zatari camp in very limited space. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Malik, for such a powerful stories that you have made in helping the people. And this is the refugee camp, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super nice things. And yeah, and let me check if we already have the question yet or not. Okay, we didn't have any question yet, so we can. I also wondering, I saw the photo that you sharing in the end of the presentation. It's have quite interesting part because it's still using some soil. Is it I saw that it's in the pot and with some irrigation system, which in the tube, in the black tube. Is this the thing that you just invented, or is?
No, we didn't use the soilless culture. So we use different type of growing media. First, we start our work just because there was a lot of old mattresses, second-hand mattresses, which need to go to landfill. So we try to use it as a growing media. However, in the past 7 years, we consume all those old mattresses for growing different type of crops. Now, it's not an issue for the authority in the camp, and it was waste material, but we consume it all. Now we start using volcanic rock, but we didn't use the soil. Also, the system that we built was hybrid. So hybrid NFT, hybrid deep water culture, all the system that we use, all of them, they are hybrid to fit with the condition and with the situation in the camp. As I mentioned, no electricity, only 4 hours every day. They have electricity, very poor water quality, little amount of water available for them. However, we try to solve all these challenges and to provide them with simple formula, simple nutrient solution that can work with all type of crops and can help them to produce what they like.
Okay, and now we got some questions from our audience. At the moment, we treat our urban environment in the north like the waste dump. There is a lot of space, earth, water, and air pollution. Do we need to address this issue first before we develop urban agriculture at the scale?
As I mentioned, why I'm proposing that we should not go through the traditional type of farming, because the limitation imposed by contamination of the soil and sometimes of the water. Due to this, I thought we need to use the new technology. Sometimes some of the soil even have some minerals which could have poisoning effect, or some soil could have some type of disease in the urban area which could create a problem for the consumer. So before we do that, we need to check that none of these issues are there. Otherwise, we have to go through the new technology like soilless culture, hydroponics, where we can safely produce our food.
Also, another question. Now we got a lot. For the second one, it's going to be what type of the irrigating method did you use? I'm aware that there is the limit of the water supply.
Yes, as I mentioned, we use different type of irrigation system because the way basically there is 6 type of hydroponic system. However, we didn't use in the camp any of these because hydroponics need electricity 24 hours. We don't have this option. Due to this, we try to change the system to suit this limitation imposed as electricity or even the poor water quality because again water was highly salty, so you cannot apply what you think. Even some people said hydroponics won't work here because sometimes we reach more than 1200 ppm. The water test show which make it unusable. However, as I mentioned, we try our best to deal with all these limitations to make it work. We use different type of system, not usual type of irrigation system using hydroponics to make things work, and that work well with us.
Okay, thank you. And we got 2 more questions. Are there ways to having larger scale urban farming project that simultaneously do not use that much electricity energies, or if they do, can we make it from like the green source?
Yeah, we already have done this. I apply similar type of thing in Afghanistan also, and some working with some community in Afghanistan where they have also poor access to electricity. Yes, there is different ways and different means that we can do it, like having instead of 1 tank, for example, 2 tank. It could be installed in high area with controlling the flow of the water. So there is different ways and different means to make that work. However, it won't be as efficient as when there is continuous electricity, but it's possible. Yes, for example, a green source, yes, solar panel, but again, it still is costly and affordable for a lot of people. So you have to look for any other option that to be used. For a rich community, there is no issue with the green energy; it can be used. But for poor community, I believe still a green source of energy is still is costly option for them.
Okay, that is not from the Q&A session. It's just like from myself. It's just like continue from your answers. Is it possible for them to use the biogas like from the waste of their daily life and then make it like the electricity, and then we can use it in the urban farming like the hydroponic system, like the pumping that you use?
Yes, in fact, I was discussing with one colleague here at Sheffield University who is collecting from different source here the waste material and try to produce biogas. Still, you have to look into the risk associated with that and how to make it efficient and really can bring the required benefit. However, again, still, to build this system for each individual family is still costly. At least, for example, now there is biology system with Royal Scientific Society, which I have visited in April. So it costs around £3,000 at least. So it's very costly option still. It's unaffordable for individual families in the camp. But we have to think how, for example, like community setup, which could provide the electricity for different families, not only for one family. So it has to be developed. It needs, to work it out how this can be done. Yeah.
Okay, and then we got 2 more. I think we can go through one and then another one can we just go and reply in the chat. The last one that we're gonna talk is, did you provide all resource required for the system, and how did you maximize engagement in training for the farming?
Okay. Yes, we provide the resources. However, we help the people to learn how to make the work sustainable. For example, we help them to build the system. However, we show them how they can extend the system, make it bigger. The one who would like to build also, we show them how to use any available resources in the camp to build their own system. We make the system, as I mentioned, low cost, very easy, very simple, affordable. And we try also to help them not to use the hybrid seed. For example, we teach the people how to collect the seed from the fruit, how to wash it, how to dry it, how to store it, and how to reuse it. So we have looked into all sustainable things to make this work sustainable even after we leave. We cover all that. Yes, how we increase the people engagement, because people love farming and they have excellent farming skills. We invest in this, and whenever we call for training, for example, if we want 20, more than 100 come forward, they would like to learn. Now everybody knows about this, and everybody would like to learn it, and people requested us to come forward and help them to build the system in their caravans.
Okay, sorry that we can't answer the last question now. It's time to move to the third speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Muad. It's very helpful and very thoughtful stories from the soilless farming. And then let's move to the third section, which is about the build the city for. Oh, sorry. So now we move from the growing food to the designing of the city, and especially what it means to build them for those who will live longest with the consequence of the climate change. So we got Dr. Michael Martin from the School of Geography and Planning, and and then we come with the question, what does it mean to reshape the cities for the children in the time of the climate crisis? So let's welcome Dr. Michael Martin.
Thanks very much for having me, and two really brilliant talks so far. So hopefully this last one doesn't let you down now. So what I'm going to do today is essentially switch the conversation a little bit toward user groups and stakeholders. So urban adaptations in our cities in response to the climate crisis need to and must respond to the most vulnerable in society, and often they fail to do so. So what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is adapting cities for children, and how through responsive design and planning we can see the development of more resilient urban futures for children and youth going forward. Essentially, in our research over a series of different projects and papers, we've looked at the impact of cities on children. And what we can see is that the way in which cities are designed provide either positive or negative impacts on children's health outcomes and their development. It's really important that children have an opportunity to engage with the built environment, and that they're able to do so in such a way that it promotes their social skills, their cognitive skills, their developmental skills, and a range of other aspects. And that's not always the case, unfortunately. Just to bring it a little bit closer to home, around 20% of the population in the UK and Ireland is under 16. So that's around 14.4 million people. And put into context, that's essentially the equivalent of the population of New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago put together. So it's a really significant number of stakeholders. The critical challenge, though, is how can we create cities that are more friendly to these particular vulnerable stakeholders during the climate crisis. And that brings us to children's rights and children's right to the city more kind of broadly. In the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child, children have a number of different rights that are related to the built environment. They have a right to be heard and taken seriously. They have a right to gather and use public spaces, and they have a right to play. They have a democratic right to the city, and that's very, very important. However, when we look at the way in which cities are regulated and governed, it's quite different. So when we look at policy within the planning system, for example, in England, there are very limited mentions of children in major policy frameworks and documentation. Ultimately, across the built environment, there's limited guidance that's specific to children and how we should tailor cities and adapt cities to these users. Just picking out one example, in the National Model Design Code, which was a very important push toward improving the design of cities in England, there are no mentions of child or children and very limited mentions of play. And that's pretty damning, actually. It brings us to the kind of typical scenario whereby children are often kind of marginalized or excluded in our urban considerations. So ultimately, children are a feature of planning, not centrally, and they're not included consistently despite having a right to participate. They're let down by a built environment that doesn't really respond or adapt properly to their needs. And that brings us to the kind of context that children live in, and it makes it even more important to start to consider urban childhoods and the challenges that children face. I've just picked out three pretty significant ones. One is the kind of mindset that dedicated play spaces is all that children need as adequate provision. So playgrounds are all children need. Cars and car-centric planning create significant issues for children, squeezing them out of urban spaces and their immediate streets and neighborhoods. And the way in which cities have developed over time under neoliberal kind of policy regimes mean that there's a desire for certain types of activities in our public spaces and our city spaces as opposed to others. So the idea is that a playground provides everything that a child needs. And we know through sustained research that that's just not the case. Actually, often playgrounds can provide certain types of play in terms of a promotion of physical play, but they don't necessarily allow children to engage in other types of play across the play spectrum. It's not to say they're not important, but it's to say that children need more than that. And unfortunately, even within the playground scenario, our research has shown that children don't have equal access to playgrounds. So we can see that there are distinct differences between the distance of where a child lives and their ability to access a playground between different towns and cities across England. So we can see that in Bath or in Oxford, it's significantly closer than if you're in Sunderland or Birkenhead or Blackpool or Southport. And that's not okay. That needs to be considered and addressed in the way in which we adapt. The prioritization of cars and the presence of cars in our streets and in our cities creates significant challenges for children. It reduces their ability to play and access their immediate neighborhoods. And it does then mean that they don't have the same opportunities or affordances to do the types of things that adults can do safely and securely. And the last thing then is that the public spaces that are more pedestrianized or are more accessible often have certain controls or limits or regulations. And we see how that has developed over time with a lot of different security companies, for example, monitoring and controlling public spaces. And that is how we see certain activities and types of engagements as acceptable compared to other unacceptable things. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on tennis and less emphasis on children and their well-being. And that's problematic because the way in which the city is configured needs to be accessible to a range of different user groups. So that brings us toward kind of more child-friendly solutions and scenarios. And it's really critical to highlight that children are a fundamental indicator species. What we design and plan for children works for a wide range of users across the intergenerational spectrum. In our book, we talk a lot about how to create best practice solutions through responding in a contextually robust way. So in our work, we have developed a transferable approach that looks at how we can capture context and the people in that context in a more methodological and systematic way that is transferable. And that is about trying to ensure that we promote responsive adaptations. And what that means is when we apply it to children, it means new opportunities. But ultimately, for everybody, it means the prioritization of places for people. And I absolutely love this image of the little girl in Paris during COVID, when we saw a fantastic range of responsive adaptations to pathogens, where new opportunities to cycle and engage with cities were created. And that really boosted children's opportunities and abilities. How that actually developed over time is a different story, but it's a great example of how quickly we can respond and adapt. I just wanted to talk through a couple of different best practice examples to give you a flavor of this. And one of those is the superblocks model within Barcelona. Essentially what we have is a collection of city blocks, which previously were all open to traffic and delivery vehicles. And in the superblocks model, you have a selection of blocks, 6 to 8, that become a more shared area where you have a reduced amount of intake of traffic and specific hours of operation for deliveries. I have a little video, if I can just show you really quickly, on how this looks and how this works. What I love about that particular video is it really showcases the range of people that come together through more responsive and child-friendly planning. I thought the little guy in the Zimmer frame going across is a brilliant example of exactly the type of person who wouldn't be there prior to that adaptation. Another example, which is slightly different, is how we create infrastructure that can have a civic outlook. So here we have a multimodal transport interchange in Aarhus in Denmark, which is called Dock 1. But it's not just about transport. It creates an environment that supports children and young people in their learning and development, creating a library space and a series of other learning environments. And it also promotes children and their kind of free time and enjoyment by a series of different play-based interventions around the structure. Another example, which is again slightly different, is how children can be incorporated in slightly more corporate environments. Here we have the Darling Quarter in Sydney, which is essentially a very corporate regeneration model with major banks in the buildings that sit behind. But the prioritization of children has created a very dynamic environment. The way in which they have worked with the public space to include water and shading, again, highlights how we can create some of those robust adaptive solutions. Children are very vulnerable to temperature changes, and a lot of play spaces often don't have appropriate shading. We know in research that there are multiple instances of slides that can be 70 degrees Celsius, which are completely unusable. So the way in which we think about play provision to incorporate natural features, water, and similar are really important. And to bring it a little bit closer to Sheffield and where we're kind of based at today's talk, we have a brilliant example in the city, which is called Pounds Park. It's very much a unique opportunity for Sheffield that creates a new play space in the middle of their big regeneration project. And it's created an environment that is dynamic and inclusive, particularly for teenage girls. So the slide structures, the kind of TP style structures, are well lit at night and are very popular with teenagers. And research has shown that teenage girls find this as a more safe and inclusive environment than what you would find typically in a playground, which is brilliant and shows the way in which we need to adapt to different users, even within the framework of children and young people. Most importantly, we're seeing play and children's access and right to the city incorporated into policy solutions. And that's where it needs to go. Play and children's right to the city have to be in policy in order to ensure resources are essentially attributed to it accordingly. So here we have the Dublin City Play Strategy, which was developed in kind of 2020 to 2022 and has subsequently been implemented. And it's a brilliant example of what a city can do to promote children and respond to their needs. However, research, including our own, has really highlighted that there are challenges with the prioritization of children. We, in different studies, have found that there are consistent issues with prioritizing children from a range of different actors and stakeholders, some the usual suspects, and then others that are completely a surprise. Even youth can find it difficult to see cities adapted to specific groups that are younger than them, causing challenges. And it highlights the need and the kind of continued need to ensure that we make play visible and navigate these challenges. Because children and their caregivers, unfortunately, are consistently asked to engage with what we call the politics of childhood and the politics of play. They should be freely available, but often there's contestation associated with that. One example of that in my research has been looking at an example of a play space that developed in response to COVID-19. It was the pop-up play space at Cathedral Gardens in Belfast. Belfast City Council spent around £350,000 on this particular space. And unfortunately, over time, the intervention that was really positive and very much quite dynamic in that area of the city was set on fire and destroyed by a series of different actions by both youth and adult groups. Unfortunately, as a result of that, a lot of the play equipment was destroyed. But even at that, you would still find that children would go there to play, despite the fact that there's multiple components of that space that are charred. And just to finish off then, planning for and with children and adapting for children is something that we are seeing an improved awareness of in the professions across the built environment. Planning, for example, is building an improved understanding of the critical issues of adapting the design of the built environment for children, young people, and play. But there are real challenges. There are inconsistencies of legislation. There's a lack of dedicated policy. There's an issue with the way in which tension materializes when children are prioritized in cities. And there's also a greater need for engagement with children as a more diverse category, understanding the difference between early years children, those who are in their tweens, and then youth running right the way up to the age of 25. Planning has a core role to play to ensure children have access to both formal and informal spaces. And that is important in the way in which they can reclaim their right to the city. And that is something that we have to challenge decision makers and built environment professionals to deliver on. They need to be daring. They need to work directly with children and young people. And they need to engage collaboratively, creatively, and with imagination to understand and design opportunities for play across the built environment. Ultimately, adapting for children is adapting for all. They are the indicator species that show how different solutions can be transferable to a wide range of groups. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And I would say that we have really real quick question already. So what do you feel Brexit to want to add of these accessibilities and child-friendly architectures? Like you said, during the COVID, things got put in place quickly, but in the long run, things don't get done. Is it money or anything else?
So I think, you know, in reflection of is this Maya's question, I think, right? Yeah, I think it's just in reflection of COVID, there were a lot of innovations that existed as a result of crises, essentially. So procurement processes were completely different. Tender processes were completely different. The length of time that it would typically take to create a play opportunity was reduced by, you're talking from years to a month. And that was amazing to see, but it didn't mean that those solutions were accepted by everybody. And that was the big challenge, is that you see a lot of those projects become an issue for other groups. One of the projects that we looked at in Australia, they felt that the car park that the kids were using, a small portion of the car park, they needed it back. And this was elderly people saying children should go and play somewhere else. They shouldn't even be there. You know, and that mindset thing is really challenging. So one of the things that we find is that it's not necessarily money. It's a lot of councillors and political actors don't want to take the risk because they know that children don't vote for them. They don't have the right to vote for them. It's other naysayers that impact those issues. And those typically are older people.
Okay, and then we got another question. She said that you mentioned children's right to the cities in the context where children's voice are structurally marginalized. What mechanism do you consider is the most effective to embedding their perspective into the urban planning processes?
I think that when you look at urban planning processes, there are so many different variations of that. I think when you look at policy making at a local level requires extensive consultation. And it would be really a missed opportunity not to have some form of consultation with younger people. And that's one of the challenges when we look at, as highlighted in the question, structurally marginalized. There are multiple instances where those processes are not democratic and so are not inclusive to begin with. And actually, the mechanisms that children have are themselves. We know that play is political, we know that play is reduced, but children play everywhere. They enact their own political agency every single day when they skip down the street or do something that is unexpected in an urban space. So whilst I would say, yes, okay, there are challenges in implementing mechanisms, children themselves are the solution through their own playful ways of being in cities and in urban spaces.
Okay, thank you. And for the next question, what's the context factors which you consider in creating the space that prioritize children, and how do you balance addressing children within policy while avoiding the politicization of them?
So thank you very much, Faris, for the question. In terms of the contextual factors, when we're looking at spaces that promote the needs of children, I think what you find is that creating specific child-friendly spaces isn't always necessarily the intention, but by creating spaces that consider more vulnerable groups, you create a more dynamic opportunity. So we see that in the way in which the built environment can be configured for a range of different user groups. So it's not necessarily always children, but working with the more vulnerable ages in terms of the most elderly or the youngest in society creates a huge amount of intergenerational benefit. So I think it's important to say that we can't necessarily focus everything on children, but it's about understanding that if we work more directly and responsively with vulnerability across spectrum of age, then we can actually create some brilliant places that promote users that we maybe didn't even realize that we were going to promote. And that kind of brings me to your last question, which is about balancing children with the kind of politicking around them. I think, unfortunately, there's kind of different ways of engaging with this. We would say that even tokenistic gestures for children are actually really helpful. Any form of engagement or kind of tacit engagement that's directed at children is good, because the amount is so limited. So what I would say is that within policy, we just need to see a more direct engagement with children and their needs. Considering the amount of children that we have, just within the UK and Ireland, that's a significant number of children, but they're not featured in anything that they should be featured in. And it's because they don't necessarily decide who should deliver policy and who should govern and rule. And that's a big challenge and a big issue.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That is very great answers. And now is the time to move to the next session, which is the general discussion. So across our talk today, a unifying message emerged: adaptation is everywhere, from the species level, how to grow up the plant, and also to the food system, and then to the bigger pictures of how the people design the cities. And whether you are thinking about the biodiversities, food securities, children, urban futures, today is remind us that the adaptation is possible, but only if we bold enough to reimagine what we take for the grant. And now is the time to hear from our audience. And then, so for all audience, you are welcome to drop the thought and any question from all of the 3 section talk in the chat, and then we can go through it. For now, I think we can go through the question that we didn't answer yet. I think we got from second section, which is like about the soilless. Moed, are you there? You
Yes.
got the question. Although very expensive, what are your thoughts on very dense agricultural method, vertical farming from MIT, one city block, benefit like 250,000 people, and then the hydroponic aquaponic as well as the sewage treatment. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, as I mentioned, vertical farming and all these type could really make big difference, particularly in the urban area or where there is no enough space or piece of land to grow different type of crops. Yes, it would have great impact in the dense city. Yes, again, sewage system. Yes, there is a lot of effort. However, every country has rules and regulation regarding using the sewage water in agriculture. Some country refuse totally using for irrigation, even for forestry, not only for fruit or vegetable production. So there is rules and regulation around that in different countries. However, you need to have a very strong, rigorous system or treatment to ensure that the water is suitable for using it in agriculture. Yes, there is a lot of work around that. A lot of scientific paper and research paper has been published. However, I'm not sure if so many organizations using the sewage water for producing vegetables and fruits. As I mentioned, there is a lot of limitation around that, and there is a lot of risk associated with using this water in producing different type of crops. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mud. And we also have another question. I think it's for you, Michael. Do you think that things would change if the voting age in the UK and Ireland were lowered to 16? On the other note, I will plug an association I have been a part that align with your work. So maybe you're interested to go through the link.
Thanks so much, Lena. I was just writing a message back to you. And yeah, brilliant organization and brilliant example of exactly what I was talking about. I think with the voting age, it's difficult to say, to be honest. But I do suspect that if more people under the age of 18 were eligible, then candidates would have to speak directly to them. And that would kind of force them to engage with issues that exist for them. Whereas currently that's just not the case.
Okay, I hope that is clear enough for Lena. And for now on, we didn't have that more question from our audience, but I had a question for all of you. Wait a minute. Okay, let me ask first then. How can we implement some idea of like your idea, like for you, Michael, the city for children, the city that's friendly to the children? Can we implement that idea to Sheffield? And what do you think about Sheffield?
Yeah, I think, so Sheffield, I think, is a really particular example of this. So Sheffield has one of the highest rates of child fatalities in road collisions in Europe. And even that doesn't necessarily lead to responsive change. However, there is significant momentum within Sheffield to try to adapt. So we're seeing increased recognition of and consideration of children's active travel. And we have been a part of some of those conversations, and it would be really brilliant to see some of that come forward. But Sheffield, unfortunately, has this statistic attached to it that I don't think a lot of people realize or know about. So it will take a lot of time to address that. I think one of the big challenges for the promotion of children is that at the national level, there's nothing there. So Sheffield have to be extremely innovative to do something around this particular subject. And some cities and contexts have done that. If you look at Dublin, if you look at Liverpool, there's lots of different examples of that. And internationally as well, when we look at places like Bogota, or we look at some examples in Seoul. But One of the challenges is we don't have play legislation. We don't have a play sufficiency legislation. We don't have a national strategy for play. So the way in which children are represented and the way in which their needs are communicated becomes quite absent and quite vague. But we are seeing increased momentum. So tomorrow, for example, we have an event at the House of Commons on exactly this. So we hope that over time there will be an increased recognition, and that will translate into a more common range of child-friendly adaptations in our cities.
Again, for you, Michael, we got really nice question from our audience. Do you need to create and recreate people and life very urban environment which are not commercialized things? And he mentioned that he's already like 70 years old, and remember that he was able to move freely in the street in a German town as a child, because there were few car and lot of interesting public space. That's very cute things.
I think it's a lovely comment, Reinhard. I really appreciate that, and I think your example really shows the generational shift that has unfortunately occurred when it comes to children and their immediate access to their kind of streets and their neighborhoods. I think in answer to your question, you would hope that we are creating life-friendly urban environments, right? I mean, that's exactly what we should be doing. But the mindsets around specific modes of infrastructure, cars, for example, become so extremely contested. And not just in terms of general people and public, transport engineers are pretty significant people to have to deal with as a practitioner. They would see it as, well, no, that we can't do it like that. It has to be done this way. So there's a lot of like mindset shifting that's needed. But thankfully, I would say we're getting now more and more examples of adaptive practice that are people specific and life friendly. And so the hope is if we just keep championing those, that we'll see more responsive solutions.
Okay, thank you. And we also got another question for you again. In the context of the climate change, how to conduct child-friendly urban construction research? Because we know that the climate change is very broad background, and how to focus on specific research.
Yeah, I think there's some brilliant studies by a range of different groups out there. It depends what the focus is. So for example, in some of our recent work, we've looked at playground accessibility and looked at the kind of drastic unequal access that children have. But in other contexts, people have looked at the way in which playgrounds need to be adapted to ensure that they are responsive to extreme heat. And that's a really brilliant way of showing that actually slides can be dangerous. A lot of these are made of metal that gets extremely hot. There's no shading, limited engagement with that. So I think it depends what way you want to look at it, because you have to look at it from the context of children's lives, and they're kind of everywhere. It's not just playgrounds, they're all over the place. But even in playgrounds research, we've got some really cool directions that speak directly to climate change, and I agree with you, the broad kind of background on that is a challenge. But hopefully there's questions for other speakers.
Okay, thank you. And then before ending the session, I got like the same question to Moet and Ross. What do you think, like how can we implement the idea, for example, like for Moet, how can we apply the soilless farm or urban farming in our city, in the Sheffield? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. As you mentioned, there is so many empty spaces in the city which can be used to grow different type of vegetables or fruits. This one point in the schools, you can allocate space in schools where you can teach, not only produce some healthy fresh produce for the kids in the school, but also as educational courses for them, to teach them and tell them about the importance of producing your own food by yourself. One day I mentioned this, maybe we should start now so that it became not too late in the future to teach our kids on how to grow their own food. I believe one day it won't be an option. It became something important, and I believe these places like school, community centers, is places where we can start teaching people and give them the chance to have healthy fresh produce inside the city.
Okay, thank you, Maud. And then the same question, what do you think how we can like use the idea that we talked today in Sheffield Ross for using the non-native plant in our city now?
Yeah, well, I'm going to turn your question slightly on its head in that I agree with the two previous speakers. So, I mean, a lot of these things are really important that they're integrated properly. So Muad's just talked about school playgrounds. So we're working at the moment with the Natural History Museum and the Royal Horticultural Society on what's called the National Nature Park, which is basically about regreening every playground in the country. And we know that when those schools do that, we do create a cooler, more child-friendly environment. They're much more engaging places for children to play, and they do provide opportunities to grow food. And that growing of food for children is a real eye-opener, because it isn't just about growing crops and getting the hands in the soil and on the plants. It makes them aware of diet, it makes them aware of health, it makes them aware of physical fitness and then mental fitness. So all these things are kind of interlinked, really. And it's really about us getting our act together and linking up proper green spaces, proper engaging spaces, places where children and adults feel safe, and places where you can get in touch with nature, but also get in touch with each other and get in touch with where food comes from and the whole, complete perfect life cycle of how where food and air and water all come together to create a healthy lifestyle. So it is interesting, the comment in the questions there about being a child in Germany 40, 50 years ago, and it was the same in Britain. We've changed our cities so much that they are often no-go places, but in reality the city itself originally was children's playground, and for every playground the city authorities put in, 10 times as many children would be playing in green spaces or open in other areas of the city where they allowed their creativity to be free and open. So it's about having a dialogue, and it's about creating opportunity at all these different levels.
Thank you, Rose. I totally agree with all of that, because basically I'm not grew up in like really city, but I moved to Bangkok like when I was going to high school, and it's totally different. It's don't have any green for me, and yeah, that's totally true. So I would like to thank you guys to coming us today for all of our speakers, and let's move to the last session. Thank you again for everyone who joining us today. On behalf of the entire organism team, that we have like many people from many countries as well. So I would like to thank you guys to being here. And then I also want to huge thank to all of our speakers, Ross, Maud, and Michael. That is very nice talk. And also the Festival of Debate and the Grantham Center for supporting this event. And to our audience, that is the most important part, for spending your afternoon exploring adaptation with us. We will leave the room soon, so I hope that you guys all enjoying the Festival of Debate today, and I apologize for any inconvenience that happened today, and thank you very much, everyone.